reputation of Zabit Magomed Sharipov preceded him in the UFC. Months before he made his debut, Mark Henry was already singing the prospect's praises. Considering Henry had trained the incredibly well-rounded Frankie Edgar, his comment was especially noteworthy. He's not a top 10 guy, he's a top 5 guy. He could be champ today. I've seen a natural in baseball, football, boxing, but never MMA. Just too many disciplines. He's the first natural MMA fighter I've ever seen. He can do it all. These sentiments were echoed by a number of his sparring partners. Zabit might be one of the best guys I've ever trained with. He can do it all with zero holes in his game. When he gets to the UFC, there is no doubt he'll be a champion. I've been training since I was 9 years old, and I never see anything like that. He is a natural MMA fighter, good everywhere. The common sentiment here was the surprisingly well-rounded nature of Zabit's mixed martial arts game. And it was no exaggeration. When he got to the UFC, he looked incredible. Creative stand-up, slick sweeps and trips, and wicked submissions. All of which indicated a depth and knowledge at an elite level in every facet of the sport. Not only no holes, but there may very well be nowhere this guy is not a complete fucking nightmare. After 2 fights, Zabit had notched up 2 Performance of the Night bonuses, submitting Mike Santiago and Shaman Morai. And the confident, creative nature of these victories put the division on notice. So far, Zabit had lived up to the hype, but by doing so in such an emphatic manner, he kinda shot himself in the foot. He was now in a position of being undervalued in the rankings while looming large over the featherweight division as an outstanding prospect and nightmare matchup who is quite possibly going to leave you looking confused before relegating your ass to the wrong end of a highlight reel finish. Despite a large social media following, he wasn't well known in the US, and so the biggest challenge in his UFC career at this point was simply finding an opponent. In February 2018, he revealed a list of 5 guys who refused to fight him. Miles Jury, Arnold Allen, Andre Fili, and a fan's choice Yair Rodriguez. Yair apparently preferring to spin his ass all the way to Bellator rather than accept a fight with Zabit. Artem Lobov was the one guy who accepted the fight, but his team later declined. And so it seemed that within 2 fights, the division had seen exactly what Mark Henry and Frankie Edgar had seen in the gym. He may not look like much, but he will Zabit your ass all over the fucking place. And nobody wanted to be a stepping stone for the next big thing. But the mere fact that Zabit even exposed those 5 fighters' names seemed out of character. In terms of personality and temperament, Zabit is much more Fedor Emelianenko than Khabib Nurmagomedov. Stoic, laconic, and even though he's usually good-humored, just like Fedor, he already often looks bored by the cameras. The spotlight, it just doesn't seem to appeal to Zabit. Inside the cage, he's all flash and fury, with a complete MMA game. Outside the cage, and despite only having 4 UFC fights, he has the demeanor of a guy who's seen it all before, and is not about to lose himself in the hype. I mean, it's early days to comment, but Zabit's attitude at least indicates a mature outlook. And so Zabit arrived in the UFC both technically and mentally far beyond his unranked status. With regards to how he got there, well, he credits much of his MMA pedigree to Almeida and Mark Henry, and his current coach in Dagestan, Mansour Uchakayev. But Zabit's work ethic, stoic mindset, and impressive base were likely formed in childhood, acquired at a unique school in the hills of his homeland, called 5 Directions of the World, or what the Chinese call the Shaolin of Dagestan. To understand Zabit's style and background, it would be enough to simply discuss the taxing and varied martial arts curriculum of the school. But to understand the stoic mentality and philosophy that permeates the school and appears to characterize Zabit, it's best to begin with the story of its founder, Hussein Magomayev. If Abdulmanap is a father of MMA in Dagestan, then this guy is a country's kung fu daddy.
Кунг-фу и ушу – это, в общем-то, название одного вида спорта. Я был основателем в этой стране этого вида спорта. Я был первый.
About 20 years ago, I read a pretty grisly book about 20th century China. It's called Wild Swans. Now, I can't remember much about that book anymore, but one line always stuck with me. It's a line that describes how peasant women would have to go back to slaving in the fields immediately after giving birth. Maternity leave didn't extend past the time it took to cut the fucking umbilical cord. That line always stuck with me as a statement of just how miserable life can get when society hits the wall and most civilized notions go right out the fucking window. The story of Gusain's birth, as told here by his wife, is even more grim than that. Forget about civility. Gusain was born in a time when basic humanity and even the minimum maternal instincts were challenged by the harsh nature of post-war Dagestan.
Гусейн родился пороком сердца, тяжелейшим пороком сердца. И у матери же родились близнецы Гусейн и Гасан. И у нее, естественно, не было молока. Время было трудное, это 50-е годы. И послевоенное время они жили очень голодно, очень голодно. И врачи ей сказали, он не жилец, он жить не будет, а вот этого ты должна спасти. И она накормила его, положила в люльку и вынесла во двор умирать. А это был январь. И дядя идет и слышит, котенок пищит во дворе. Смотрю, колыбелька, там Гусейн лежит. Я, говорит, взял его, пришел домой, избил сестру и сказал, говорит, в первую очередь будешь кормить его. И вот так он жил.
That's a pretty ugly world to be born in. And as a baby and throughout his childhood, he was repeatedly given a life expectancy of a fucking fruit fly. He was constantly battling heart problems. Ultimately, this weakness is what led him to athletics and martial arts in the first place. Remember, in Dagestan, weakness is unacceptable. Fighting is mandatory.
В Дагестане быть слабым непростительно.
Раньше, как собак, вот заставляли нас драться. Кто победит, и разнимали. Очень много приходилось в уличных боях драться. Нормально.
And so, as a sick child, Gusain hit the weights in order to be able to defend himself. When he went to college, he studied art, but also became acquainted with martial arts and Eastern philosophy. In Moscow, he became a karate coach and eventually became the national trainer for the USSR. In the 80s, tensions between the Soviets and China heightened, and so Eastern martial arts were outlawed. This led to a number of arrests for karate practitioners in Moscow. While Gusain was already embroiled in a separate controversy, authorities killed one of his friends for practicing karate, which led Gusain to flee Moscow for the hills of Dagestan. It was at this time he began to sense that solely focusing on the athletic side does not produce a well-rounded person. From the school's website, today, an avalanche of negative information and difficult life situations rushes at us. The pace of life is sharply wound, and apart from the will, the person is unable to protect himself. A person cannot stop, look around, and comprehend what is happening. In search of a way out, he begins to go to extremes, tossing from primitive mysticism to religious fanaticism. And at the same time, the solution is quite obvious. A person must find himself as a person. You can recognize yourself as a person only with peace of mind, and this is exactly the state that can be achieved most effectively by practicing martial arts. In Dagestan, he began to teach Kung Fu to children in a plastic tent, and the small makeshift school eventually attracted international acclaim for producing high-level wushu talent. From this, he was authorized to build a boarding school in the hills of Dagestan, where he could educate children away from their parents for 29 days in a month, but also away from the influence of extreme ideas at vulnerable ages. And so Hussein is very much like Abdulmanap, in the sense that he's trying to prepare his students for an unforgiving world, and they both employ the core principle of strict discipline. But while Abdulmanap is guided by Islam, Hussein appears to take a more secular approach, steeped in Eastern philosophy, preaching a message of tolerance, respect, and moderation.
Мы, наверное, какой-то островок все-таки, вообще-то. Потому что надо сказать и признать, что мы во многом не вписываемся в понятие этих людей наших, начиная от министерств, кончая вот религиозным деятелям и вообще людьми, которые относятся к воспитанию детей, как они понимают, так, по их понятиям. Понимаете, нас это не устраивает. Как мы можем жить здесь и соглашаться с тем, что нас не устраивает? Мы тоже участвуем в этой войне. Идет война. Надо назвать вещи своими именами. Понимаете? Идет война. Вот. Мы участвуем в этой войне. Только мы мирные войны. Понимаете? Мы мирные войны. Мы решаем эти вопросы не убийством, не тем, что мы насаждаем культ силы. Там. Нет, ни в коем случае. Напротив.
It's clear Hussein views his school as a refuge, a secular pocket of sanity in the region's never-ending war for the youth.
Мы будем делать все для того, чтобы постепенно внедрить в сознание этих ребят, а это возможно, мы уже знаем.
One of the school's central tenets is to prepare kids for life's ups and downs through sport, not to get too carried away in the glory of a victory, and not to wallow in the pain of a loss. Zabit likely takes success in his stride because he knows he will and already has been humbled by defeat.
Одни победы не могут быть, одни поражения тоже не могут быть. Мы этому обучаем, говорим, что не надо слишком радоваться успехам и не надо слишком огорчаться поражением. Закон единства и борьбы противоположностей. Это все пронизывает всю жизнь. Если этот закон этим овладеть и стремиться к середине, потому что нельзя быть в крайних проявлениях каких-то.
He also discusses the dangers of becoming formidable without having a moral code, and this idea applies to every vocation.
Эффективнее всего прожить жизнь, занимаясь детьми. Что человек? Он будет чемпионом мира, он может стать подлецом или негодяем, если у него.
And so the school tries to take ethics, philosophy, academia, and martial arts and tie them all together to create a complete, socially well-adjusted person. As the website says, 5 Sides of the World was established in '96 with the aim of developing and promoting martial arts as a means of a healthy lifestyle, as well as to involve children in a system of moral, spiritual, and physical education. It's an admirable goal, and if you compare that to most education, where you often feel like you're being prepared to become a cog in a system, Hussein appears to have his priorities in order.
Our motto is if we graduate a half-literate student, it's not the worst thing in the world. The worst thing for us is to graduate a badly behaved student, so we pay a lot of attention to teaching them about values.
The school is built on hard work. The kids themselves describe how they simply don't have time for mischief. The timetable is rigid and exhausting.
Здесь все по режиму, и здесь и не успеваешь как-то и чем-то другим заняться. И вначале после уроков там тренировки, и бываем на самоподготовке, делаем домашнее задание, потом после этого тренировки обратно. Здесь времени нет на то, чтобы там погулять, как в домашних условиях, после учебы погулять где-нибудь или что-то, вообще нет на других привычек там каких-то без этих причин.
Mark Henry talked about the first complete MMA fighter, and when you look at the variety of techniques these kids are training twice a day, every day for 10 of their formative fucking years, it's hardly surprising that by the time they reach adulthood, it's all totally second nature. You can clearly see elements of Zabit's style in training footage from the school. The result of their dedication is that the school is known all over the world, but especially in China, and it has produced many world champions in various disciplines, as well as the only non-Chinese winner of the Kung Fu World Cup, the current UFC fighter, Muslim Salikhov.
Let's go check it out. The school is located in Halimbek-Aul, just over the mountain ridge from the Dagestani capital. Over the years, it's produced 10 world and 11 European champions, as well as Olympic gold and silver medalists in Beijing in 2008. That fighter's name is Muslim Salikhov, who was also named the King of Kung Fu, becoming the only non-Chinese warrior in the world to be awarded this title.
I've discussed the region in several videos already, but in this documentary, we got to hear details from a far more unsettling source, the kids themselves.
Ну, как у нас в поселке, дом взорвали. Вот. Террористы там жили, как бойцы ОМОН особо. Мне как там сразу бомбежка началась в этот дом. Там сверху, чтобы не убежали один. Да, я у брата тогда был, через 10 домов это все происходило.
6, наверное, где-то 5 месяцев, 4 прошло, наверное, взрыв был тоже. Хасаверти больше всего ваххабистов есть. Но они все ходят бородами. Там меня папа вообще не пускает эту мечеть ходить, ваххабистскую. Говорит, если, 5 метров, если подойдешь, я тебе руки, ноги переломаю.
So while the details of the wrestling schools, Abdulmanap's MMA school, and Gusain's Kung Fu school may differ, they are all guided by the same ultimate goal, a goal that takes precedence over belts and medals, and one I've discussed many times on the channel. Here it is perfectly summarized by Gusain himself.
Давай мы к вам положим в траву, ладно? Одним словом, суть работы вообще проста. Оберечь детей от этой среды внешней, агрессивно. Я имею в виду людскую среду. Так что не обращайте внимания на них. Его надо развить нравственно, духовно, его надо укрепить. Потом выпускать в мир, когда ему уже не будет страшно все эти перипетии жизненные.
This school has in the region of 200 pupils on their roster, and they now have 2 fighters in the UFC. There's a page on their website proudly dedicated to the career of Zabit. And so while the youths in wrestling worship stars like Sadulayev Abdul Rashid, Zabit now represents a tangible alternative and a positive role model for the thousands of kids who will come through the Shaolin of Dagestan, an exceptional representative of the program. And with regards to Gusain, I feel safe speculating that his school has saved many lives over the years and helped give discipline and direction to thousands. In his capacity to fight it, he has been winning his own personal war. Considering the impact of his life on the youth of Dagestan, well, it's a good thing his uncle found his ass in the courtyard that day, because the man has certainly made a difference.